You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always alongside my intrepid co-hosts, Rania, Khalek. And Rania, of course, it's always great to be alongside you, but very important to have your voice here. It's always important to have your voice. You are in Lebanon, as many of our viewers know, where there is quite a bit of news happening, and we're going to be talking about that quite a bit later in the show. So I was always great to be alongside you, and I think very important this week to be able to update us on what's happening in Lebanon, which is a rapidly moving situation.
Thank you, Eugene. I will be going pretty in depth, so stick around for that. But I know we've got some guests first, especially our first guest. So why don't you go ahead and introduce him since we've already got him on the line? He's in Iran.
Yes. Yes, absolutely, and critically important. And we'll get back to some of the other details later. But we are very, very honored to be joined here by Navid Zarrinal, who's the host of the Colony Archive and, of course, is on the ground in Iran. Navid, thank you so much for being with us.
Eugene and Rania, thank you so much for having me.
Well, the first question I will pose to you, Navid, is what is the situation there? I mean, we are seeing a lot of reports in the news that the level of bombing and attacks is very significant, and so just want to get your perspective on the current situation on the ground.
Sure. So I woke up on a Saturday morning and I turned on the news and Israel and U.S. had attacked Iran, but I kind of just went about my day doing some chores around the house. But then by noon, I started hearing the Iranian interceptors intercepting the Israeli and the American bombs. And I live about 50 meters away from an IRGC garrison. It's a very large garrison, one of the biggest ones in the capital. And then I saw an explosion either inside the garrison or behind it. I knew that things were about to go down. And I insisted on staying in my apartment, even though I live in central Tehran, where there are a lot of IRGC locations and police stations. So it is not the safest location. So I eventually went to a friend's home that was west of Tehran in a kind of a less insecure area of the city. And then on Sunday, they started bombing intensely my neighborhood and some of the glass in the building broke in the parking area. And then what has been happening since? So I think we're in the 6th day of the unprovoked U.S. Israeli assault on Iran. Is that the bombing campaigns is pretty intense. So they have targeted both military and police locations and also civilian areas. So either it's being done intentionally or recklessly, or as a result of the damage to the surrounding military area. So I can give you some examples. So the Gandhi Hospital in Tehran was targeted. Also the police park. So there's a park named Police, but it has nothing to do with the Iranian police force. Rather, it's just called Police, and that was also targeted. And then also a school of 168 girls in Minab, which is city in Iran South, that was also targeted, and all those girls were killed. So there are the military areas being targeted and also the civilian areas. And there have been, I think, over 1,000 deaths so far.
I mean, Navid, the image seeing, the videos we're seeing, it's so reminiscent of Gaza, of Lebanon, what we're used to seeing in Lebanon. I want to ask you, though, about, that first video that Trump put out when he announced that he had launched this war with the Israelis last Saturday. He ended it by calling on the Iranian people to rise up. You'll never have a chance to rise up against your government. And then now in the last couple of days, we're hearing that the U.S. is arming or working with a separatist group, particularly a Kurdish militia, but there are other separatist groups around Iran as well, as particularly around Iran's borders. And so I'm curious about your thoughts on how plausible that is and what that might look like, because we've known for a long time that covertly the U.S. And the CIA have, been trying to work with groups, Israelis as well, by the way, to essentially destabilize Iran.
That's right. So, yes, I mean, there is the threat of the Kurdish militias entering Iran through Iraq and through the borders. But the reports that I'm seeing right now from the Iranian media, I'm not on the border town, so I can actually have firsthand experience of it. But the reports that I'm seeing from the Iranian media is that the IRGC has targeted the assets of the Kurdish militias in Iraq. And so the threat has subsided. And the Iranian courts are, I would say, generally loyal to the idea of Iran as a whole, because they're some of the oldest Iranian people. So the Kurds and the Kurdish-speaking people are some of the oldest Iranian people, and they have a very strong sense of nationalism. And I would say the separatist elements within the Iranian courts, it's not comparable to Iraq or Syria or Turkey. So in that sense, I would say the courts will likely, most of them will remain loyal to the idea of Iran. So even if they're opposed to the government, they will not cause major problems when it comes to Iran's territorial integrity. But the other thing is, outside these separatist groups, there's also the risk of the opposition that is supported by U.S. and Israel, or they're mentally colonized and impacted by the Western-controlled media. So we have a very large Persian language media network that is funded by the Zionists and by the Westerners, and people do watch and consume the information from them. And some of those people might come to the streets, but thus far, because of the assassination of the Iranian leader, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, there's so many pro-revolution forces and people on the streets that they have not had a chance to come out yet. But if that momentum, the revolutionary momentum, subsides, then there's a risk that they will come to the streets and there might be some civil unrest.
You know, Navid, one thing I want to just get your response to is, of course, the Trump administration's so-called justifications. You mentioned earlier this was an unprovoked attack. Of course, they're claiming all sorts of things, you know, that are very contradictory on sort of quote unquote imminent threat. But I think with the deeper underlying basis they're trying to lay is that Iranians, you know, want to kill Americans, that they hate Americans, that there's all these other things. So, you know, as an Iranian who is there, I wonder how you respond to these sorts of accusations that the Trump administration is using to back this attack.
That's right. So I would say that I think any person who would use their brain and would use evidence and facts would understand that there is no imminent Iranian threat to the Americans. So even when the Americans brought their naval fleet, that was a major threat to Iran. But Iran did not strike American assets until U.S. and Israel started their operations and assassinated the Iranian leader, who is dear to both Iranians and the larger Shia community around the world. So I would say the idea of an imminent Iranian threat has always been bogus. I mean, and you're very right that the contradictions are ridiculous, because one day they say that they obliterated the Iranian nuclear program. The other day they say that Witkoff said that Iran is only a week away from making nuclear weapons. So it's filled with contradictions and bogus, and there is no imminent threat. And I think that even American officials admitted, some of the Democrats admitted, that there has not been any evidence presented to us that Iran poses an imminent threat. And when Iran targeted the U.S. bases around the region, that was again in retaliation to U.S. bullying and to U.S. aggression and to also U.S. helping Israel conduct its war on Iran.
Navid, I want to ask you in terms of the sort of, I had you on the show, on my show, Dispatches, a month ago to talk about the aftermath of the protests earlier in the year. And we were talking about, you were making, a criticism of the Iranian government that part of the reason they were in the situation they were in is because they had been unresponsive and using this strategic patience against the Americans and Israelis, and it hadn't worked, and it actually, in fact, empowered them. And I'm curious now, a month later, after this war has been unleashed on Iran, what do you make of the Iranian response and this kind of end of the era of strategic patience?
That's right. Yeah. And so, I mean, I hate that I was right, but I was so cynical about the negotiations. And I told your audience in that video episode that we did that the negotiations are just bogus and there's no real reason to negotiate because, it is just a facade. Diplomacy is a facade for war. And I said that there might be an opportunity to negotiate with a change in presidency or in a few years. But at this moment, or, let's say last month, negotiations, I mean, it was clear there was a facade for war, and then the U.S. and Israel would eventually attack. And it was also a strategy by the U.S. and Israelis to put the blame on Iranians, because the idea was that, well, we came to negotiate and they did not accept our offer. The same thing they did with the Palestinians, because if you talk to the Zionists, they always have these kind of fancies that the Israelis offered great peace deals to the Palestinians and they rejected it. But if you actually look at the content of those deals, it was always extremely one-sided and unfair. And it was the same thing with Iran. So what Trump was offering to the Iranians was that you basically surrender and then we'll bomb you anyways. And of course, they're not going to accept that. They're not going to accept the Syria type situation. So the negotiations were going on, but then Donald Trump blew up the negotiations table at the request of Netanyahu and Israel. And we are in the situation that we are now. But as you correctly said, the whole kind of restraint and a strategic patience and going along with all the etiquettes of diplomacy, that's over for now. And Iran, from the reports that I'm seeing here and what I'm seeing on the streets, is responding pretty forcefully to the unprovoked U.S. Israeli attack.
And Navid, you mentioned some of the regional anger and protest at the assassination of the supreme leader. And, as someone who, you've lived in Pakistan, you know some of the different regional pieces. And we saw certainly there in Pakistan, maybe most notably, not only large protests against the action of assassinating the supreme leader, but, significant killings of protesters. I wonder if you could give people some insight into that. I mean, Kashmir, we've seen large protests and different things, because I think from the, American perspective, the U.S. perspective, people only see negative things and might not have any real insight into why there might be large numbers of people in countries that are, considered U.S. allies who are deeply opposed to what took place with that assassination.
Yes, Eugene, I'm glad that you confirmed that, because I can only see the Iranian media right now, and I saw, massive crowds coming out in Kashmir and in South Asia and in Iraq from the Iranian media. So it seems like from your side, you're also seeing a lot of reports about that. I think what the Trump administration was ignorant of, or they just completely ignored, is that the way they assassinated Sayyid Ali Khamenei had it fit into the Shia narrative, because we are in the month of Ramadan, and the first Shia Imam Ali, was assassinated, was killed in month of Ramadan, and the anniversary of his assassination is coming up. And also, Khamenei was killed alongside his family members. So one of his 14-month granddaughter was killed by U.S. and Israel as well. So the whole assassination fits the Shia narrative, and there's a lot of linkages between the Iranian leader now and the first and the third Shia imams that have a very significant martyrdom story around them, and they're revered by Shias around the world. And so now that we see this regional support, I think that is creating a lot of problems for the Americans, because they're not safe anywhere in the region now. I mean, their consulates are being attacked in Karachi. The Iraqi militias will likely continue to target American interests. So, I mean, I think the kind of hole that Trump has walked himself into and walked the Americans into is that he's creating so much insecurity for the Americans in the region. And I saw the photos of the 4 American soldiers who were killed in I think it was a Kuwaiti base, in which they were killed after the Iranian strikes against the American bases. And that also saddened me. I mean, there's so many people who are dying here, more than the number of Americans that are being killed in the region. And that's extremely sad. But I mean, for me, even though I'm Iranian, I'm not thinking about it in nationalist terms as such. Rather, I see these Americans too, because they're coming to the military due to the lack of healthcare and lack of subsidized education or free education in the U.S. And you could see their faces. I mean, they looked like they were coming from poverty. And that was also extremely sad for me to see. I mean, at one level, you want American casualties, so the bullies back off and the oppressors back off, and they stop bullying and attacking Iran. But at the same time, when you see the faces of these soldiers, you see that they're the human cost of the unjustified and unprovoked war that the U.S. and Israel are waging on Iran and the broader Middle East.
I want to ask you, Navid, about your assessment with the way that Iran has gone after, I guess I would put it, energy, maybe trying to put a global economic cost on being attacked in terms of essentially closing the Strait of Hormuz. And we've seen some missiles falling on energy infrastructure across the Gulf. I think I read that, because Qatar had to shut down LNG production. Apparently, it takes about 2 weeks to bring LNG production offline or back online after you've taken it offline. So essentially, it's going to create a problem for the supply of energy. And I saw a report that South Korea, as a result, has something like 10 days or 9 days left of natural gas. So I'm curious what you think about this particular aspect of Iran's strategy of trying to basically place an economic cost on being attacked by the way, a war that, of course, the Israelis and Americans initiated, but many European countries are starting to involve themselves in.
That's right. So, I mean, Iranians, Lebanese, Palestinians, we're used to crises and we can manage crises. So when COVID happened here, there was no hoarding. And right now, when you go to supermarkets, everything's stacked. Nobody is hoarding anything. Nobody's, buying things in bulk because they're used to crises and they come together and manage things. So even if you might have civil unrest due to inflation or due to other reasons, when it comes to crises like these, people stand united. But then I think in the first world and in the West, people are not used. The pain tolerance is so much lower. And that's why I mentioned that if there are a lot of American casualties, the U.S. might back off. And in the same way, in addition to the military, the life dimension, there's also the economic dimension. And I don't think Americans are the type of people who would tolerate paying, say, $7, $8, $10 per gallon for gas. Eventually, they will major discontent. And that's one of Iran's strategy to close the Strait of Hormuz. And the kind of reports I'm getting here is that the traffic in the Strait of Hormuz has decreased by about 90%, and that only oil tankers that pass through are the ones that pass through with Iran's permission, and I think they're headed for China, but the rest are pretty much, they're not going because they could be hit by Iranian missiles. So by targeting the economic dimension, I think what Iran is trying to do is make economic life difficult for the first world nations and also for the Persian Gulf region, for the countries that host U.S. bases. And through that, they're hoping that the U.S. would back off. And if the U.S. would backs off, then Israel does not stand a great chance in fighting a sustained war against Iran.
Mm. Well, there's so much here and so much to cover. And Navid, we are always really, really grateful that you are willing to join us, even in very difficult circumstances. Navid Zarrinal, host of the Colony Archive, thanks so much for being with us once again on the Freedom Side.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Rania.
Really appreciate Navid's updates. We've been trying to get him on, but of course, internet is not easy to get by for everybody in Iran at the moment. But excellent analysis. I did a really good episode of Dispatches literally a month ago. And I think it actually is still very relevant considering what happened after that. And Navid is a really, really excellent commentator and analyst on this stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I thought it was a great episode, and I really hope people check that out. I mean, check out all the episodes of Dispatches, which give a lot of great background to all these issues that we're talking about today, and remain relevant. Even some of them that, are from a couple years ago really help you understand what's going on. It's like a good book. Rania, I thought Navid's point was very good there towards the end about sort of the pain points in the United States. The first thing I opened up on social media this morning was someone in the Washington, D.C. area talking about the just like massive increase in the cost of gas. And, we don't know where that's going very substantially, but, it's a big topic of discussion because obviously Trump and others, they're like, we're waging this war for you, for Americans. But at the end of the day, it's increasing the cost of living and different aspects of that. So, it's sort of, to me, it feels like an important aspect of this. And I think partially why I've been tracking polling, you're seeing the opposition to this war seems to go up over time because I think, a lot of people were against it in the first place, but people are starting to recognize what's going on. I know we have some slides that also kind of illustrate some of these points. I don't know if we have one about inflation, but I think that's the biggest concern, of everyone here. So yeah, you can see prices up 25% since 2020, wages relatively flat, 63% of people living paycheck to paycheck, and only 47% could cover a $1,000 emergency. And yet, and still, we're spending tens of billions of dollars, on war in the West Asia. Certainly, I think I saw someone say like $1 billion a day. I don't know if we have as a few slides ahead, but like the cost of a THAAD interceptor, and then I want to turn it to you, Rania, as well. But it's sort of, I think, an amazing reality here of what we're seeing. Yeah, like one of these interceptor missiles, 172 public school teachers could be hired for a year, and yet the Trump administration is cutting the Department of Education, health insurance for 470 families. They're cutting Medicaid. You could feed 5,600 people through SNAP. They're cutting SNAP. So it's like just one of these missiles could make such a huge impact in people's lives. And I think the late, great Tupac said it the best. They got money for war, but can't feed the poor. I mean, it really is just an unbelievable scenario to look at that aspect of what's happening here. Obviously, it's not as bad as being bombed and being killed, but I think this is what Dr. King meant when he said the bombs exploding in Vietnam explode in my own community. Like there's a deep connection between the wars abroad and the war being waged on like everyday people at home by, the Trump billionaires.
I mean, yeah, $1 billion a day for this insane war on Iran that now, a Politico article out today said that CENTCOM is sending more intelligence analysts to Tampa, Florida, to deal with this war on Iran, and they're putting like those positions out. They'll need to be there for potentially 100 days. And they're thinking this could go till September. And I'm just like, what the hell? Only 25% of Americans support this war. I mean, those are 25% of Americans. I mean, they must be brain dead to support this war because it's just absurd how it's unleashed hell on this region. And most Americans, have been conditioned to like not really see the rest of the world as human, even if they're good-hearted people. You really are conditioned by like media and just movies and everything to see so many people, particularly in the Middle East. It's like, that's happening over there. It doesn't really matter. They're not really people. All that's to say, like, I know that, but even just from an American point of view, only 25% support on this war that has no reason behind it. And like you said, people have 2 jobs to pay rent. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is sitting there talking about, we're gonna basically fill in the gaps for paying for insurance of ships and actually have the Navy escort them through the Strait of Hormuz so that oil doesn't get backed up. And it's just like, this is what you're spending people's taxpayer money on. And you know what? It is such a demonstration of the lack of democracy that we have in the U.S. If 25% of Americans support a war, and still there is a war powers resolution before Congress, which it's not even a binding resolution. It's just basically saying where you stand on this war, and it still couldn't pass in the Senate. It's insane. And even beyond that, you had Democrats voting to invoke the war powers of Congress, but they're still willing. Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are still willing. They're saying to vote for supplemental $50 billion for Trump's war because, well, he already started it. I mean, it's just completely insane. Nobody wants this except for the lunatics who are in charge of U.S. empire and their groveling followers in, among the European elite class. And it really is I don't know, it's an insult to the American people that this is what their government is spending money on to destroy the lives of the people where I'm sitting right now. And while their own people, go without, with food insecurity, without being able to afford the basic necessities of life. For many people, that's increasing in the US. And then on top of that, they're just going to have to be paying more for gasoline and God knows what else. And for what? For what? so that the Middle East can be on fire? It's just complete batshit lunacy. And I mean, I'm sorry if I'm rambling here and getting angry. It's
No,
just,
you're good.
Eugene, the suffering that has unraveled in Lebanon over the last 5 days, 4 days, whatever this started, feels like it's been a year already, is just so unbelievably high. Like the amount of displaced people in the streets, the bombings, the leveling of buildings. And I'm going to talk more about this later, but it is so extreme. Again, for what? For what? So these genocidal psychopaths who run the US and their client state Israel can steal more land and have hegemony over a region that's on fire? It's just really heartbreaking and upsetting. I'm just drained at this point. I don't know what else to say.
No, I think that's 100% correct. And I'm glad you pointed out that Politico article, Alyssa Slotkin, the Democrat from Michigan, saying the same thing. Well, we're in it, kind of shrugging her shoulders as if that's a reason to keep going. And I think your point about, the hegemony is so key. I mean, I saw Lindsey Graham was like, this is going to determine the future of the Middle East for the next 1,000 years. And all I could think about then was Marco Rubio's thing at the Munich Security Conference of basically like, we need like a new colonial mission around the world. And the EU needs to unite with the United States to like essentially repeat what took place with the genocide and colonization of Native Americans in the Western Hemisphere, the slave trade, all these different things like that. This was all good and positive, and like we need to reunite and do it again for, I think he said like another century of Western dominance or something like that, which is just everything about it is just so wild. And I think your point is correct. Like, why mention that historical example? The only reason could be is to justify what you're doing now, the genocide in Gaza, the just brutal destruction of Lebanon, what's happening in Iran, what's already happened in Iraq, what's happened in Libya. And, I think both of us who, came up politically in the era of George W. Bush, it's like, the project for a new America, right? Like the whole context of it is we must destroy, balkanize, and control West Asia. And like, here are the 7 countries, we're going to go after them. And here they are doing exactly what they're going to say, no matter what the human cost, no matter how many millions of people's lives are completely snuffed out and how many millions more's lives are just totally changed in ways that you can never change. Because I think, as you know very well, like even if you're not physically hurt, the psychological trauma of these situations, on millions of people has a huge impact as well. The economic impact, which goes over time, like it really is tens of millions of people who are affected. And like you said, for what? For basically for everyone who's not a billionaire to actually have a worse quality of life, and for billionaires to make a ton of money off of it. And so, yeah, the one final thing I'll just say that just also is blowing my mind about this is the whole thing that like it's about Iranian nuclear weapons. But the United States right now is spending $1.7 trillion to do a complete overhaul of every phase of the nuclear weapons, the ground-fired ones, the naval ones, the bombs, like $1.7 trillion to do over the entire nuclear weapons. And then we're complaining about other countries that don't even have nuclear weapons, that somehow this is an imminent threat. And I thought the point, and I'll maybe just leave it here, that you made, Rania, about how people are conditioned via TV is so true, because that Netflix movie just came out about a nuclear strike on America. And as someone pointed out to me, they said, isn't it just so wild that the US is like the biggest, baddest nuclear power that's always, saying that they will use a nuclear first strike, but somehow the movie that's marketed to Americans is like North Korea or China or Russia. They don't reveal who is like the real danger in firing nuclear weapons against us. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's truly unbelievable. I know we have a really great guest coming up, but there's a few things I didn't get to say in the beginning that I want to, Eugene.
Yeah.
I want to remind everybody who's watching to please make sure you smash the like button, guys. Please hit the like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. And also make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News. Make sure you hit that bell so that you get a notification when we have new content. We've been doing so much coverage of this war on Iran. I did 2 live streams last week with so many great guests. I recently had Vali Nasser, an excellent Iran analyst on Dispatches. Such a good episode, just very straightforward, matter-of-fact analysis, totally on point. You can go check that out. And I don't want you to miss those episodes. It's really important at this time. So please make sure you're subscribed to notifications. Make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News. Make sure you're liking, commenting, engaging with our content so that YouTube's algorithm doesn't drown us out. And also, we are an independent media outlet. We're able to bring you coverage, bring you guests like Navid and others who are in Iran. I'm able to do my job here in Lebanon. Eugene is able to do what he does. We're all able to do our work here at Breakthrough News because of our audience who supports us. So consider becoming a Breakthrough News member by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News and becoming a member today. It's more important than ever that we break through the warmongering tsunami of propaganda from the mainstream media, and you can literally help us do that by becoming a member. Now, before Eugene introduces our next guest, I really quickly wanted to, I think this is actually a good way to queue up our next guest in a way. I wanted to play a clip from Stephen Miller because he had an interesting framing, an interesting take on this war in Iran. Let's see it.
But what you're seeing right now, Sean, is a military under President Trump's leadership that's not fighting politically correct, that isn't fighting with its hands tied behind its back. One of the reasons I fear, Sean, that some people in this country lost faith in the military and the capacity to use that military to defend us is because we had a woke Pentagon, because we had a military who at the very highest levels, not the warfighters, was forced to fight a less than full fight. What you're seeing now.
So there you have it. We are about to go to maybe World War III in the name of anti-wokeness. And to that, Eugene, let's go ahead and segue into our next guest.
Wow, amazing. Very, very happy to have with us here on exactly this topic about what the implications for this war could be. Brian Becker, who's the host of the Socialist program that also, by the way, did a great episode about Operation Ajax and some of the aspects about the history and the contemporary reality of Iran. Brian, as always, great to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. I like also that we're wearing the same shirt, it seems.
That was intentional.
Listen, great minds think alike, as they say. Brian, there's so much to this issue. I even just saw, just before we came on air, Rudaw, the Kurdish news source, reporting that U.S. Special Forces had landed in Iraq and had some sort of battle with Iraqi military. Obviously, we're seeing the sort of regional aspects of everything that's happening back and forth here in the Israeli or U.S. Israeli Iran war and the possibility of regional pieces there. I saw a video of a Sudanese general. I don't know how legitimate this is, but seems to be a real video saying we're willing to go fight in Iran. And it just feels like there's just so many different implications. You've got, Canada and European countries being drawn into this. I don't want to be hyperbolic here, Brian, but it does feel like there's a real slippery slope aspect to what the U.S. has started here that could lead to a war like we haven't seen maybe since World War II.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, when you think about the other U.S. wars of aggression, the Iraq invasion in March 2003, the Afghanistan invasion, the war against Libya, Vietnam, Korea, Panama, Grenada, you can keep going and going. They've been preceded by, in most cases, a sort of a build-up to the war, an explanation by the chief executive, by the president, telling the people of this country why this was very urgent that the United States go to war. None of that has happened. It's very interesting that none of that has happened with this latest war against Iran. Donald Trump didn't come out. He didn't make national address to the country. It seemed to be very, in a way, reflexive, in a way, impulsive. Obviously, the U.S. had built up a huge armada in the Middle East ready to strike. The Israelis have been planning this war for many decades, and of course, it's number one priority for the Israeli regime. But I believe that there's an element of extreme recklessness in this adventure, meaning that everything can go wrong for the U.S. war drive. I think the U.S. government, the Trump administration, anticipated that Iran would be hit so hard, that so many of its leaders would be assassinated, that so many military strikes would take out both military intelligence and civilian structures, that the Iranian government would basically plead for peace right away, that they would accept a ceasefire similar to what happened in last June, when the Israelis struck Iran for 12 days and then Trump dropped 21,000-pound bunker buster bombs and then declared a ceasefire. Well, Iran this time knows that they are in an existential battle. They are going to fight. They have no option but to fight. They're striking countries, the Gulf countries, The Straits of Hormuz are closed. The war is clearly widening. And the U.S., in spite of what Stephen Miller says about the U.S. is, fighting without one hand tied behind its back and it's no longer woke, there is a limit to U.S. military power. The war makers didn't think this in Vietnam. They thought for sure that the U.S. would win because of its military supremacy. But the other side, the Vietnamese, were determined to fight and fight and fight, and they were not going to stop fighting. Iran is a country of 90 million people. It's not Iraq. It's not Libya, which had 5 million people. It's a big country, a big military. The people don't want war. They're suffering from the war. But I think there's also a determination this is do or die for Iran. And as a consequence, I think this war could easily get out of control for the U.S. government and bring into play forces that they did not anticipate at all. Again, because there wasn't a great deal of thinking or planning. I think Trump really did this because he was being destroyed in terms of popularity at home. The ICE raids were making him very unpopular. All of the attacks on working class people, on the black community, on women, all of that was being rejected by the American people. So Trump decided very quickly, I'm going to be a wartime president. I can do to Iran what I just did to Venezuela. I can do it. I can do whatever I want to. So there's this hubris and arrogance that has driven this decision. And I think it could easily backfire on U.S. imperialism as we see things unfold in the coming weeks.
Brian, I see these polling numbers on this war in Iran, and they're just, the popularity is just not there. The support for this war among the American public is just not there. And I think that presents an opportunity for people to express their dismay, distaste, opposition to this war. And I think it's more important than ever that people get organized and do, just because the stakes are so high. And I feel them very personally. I mean, this week, I'm in Lebanon, and the situation here deteriorated so rapidly starting on Monday. It's so, what's happening is just so intense, so insane. It's going to get worse. We just saw Israel issue displacement orders for the entire southern suburbs of Beirut, where hundreds of thousands of people live. There's complete, utter chaos in Beirut right now because people are just trying to get out. They're trying to stoke civil unrest in the process. The entire South is under or displacement orders. They've invaded the South, on and on and on. All that's to say that's just in Lebanon, not to mention what's happening in Iran. So what do you say to people who maybe feel a little bit exhausted after a couple of years of genocide? Why is it still so important? And I'm sorry if I'm cutting in and out here. My internet's a little unstable. But why is it so important for Americans to continue to demonstrate their opposition to this?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Rania, because I think it's the most important issue in the world right now. And it's certainly the most important issue for people in the United States. People in the United States are dealing with a lot of assaults from the Trump administration. But this war tops everything, I would say. And that's not really to diminish anything else, but the priority has to be there. 70% of the people, as you mentioned, oppose the war in Iran, but it's still a passive opposition. We in the Answer Coalition held demonstrations on Saturday in 60 cities, 70 cities on Monday. We're having another day of national protest this coming March 7th. We're doing everything to kind of break through. We need to find a way to bring that powerful sentiment of the American people who oppose this into being an active force in American politics. Now, the U.S. government is well aware that the American people don't want a war. That's why they got rid of the draft. They want to make sure they're telling the American people, look, we're not going to do any dying. We're not going to have boots on the ground. All the bleeding, all the suffering is going to be somewhere else. But even as this war begins to widen, as the people in the United States see that invariably U.S. soldiers and Marines and sailors are going to be killed, invariably the U.S. economy is going to suffer huge, devastating impact. And it won't be the billionaires who are suffering, even if they lose a couple $100 million. They don't care. But working families who can't make ends meet, and that's half the country, they do care. And the price of gasoline is about to go up maybe by 25-30% in the next couple of weeks. We have to reach the people of the United States. And this is going to be the challenge. Again, I say to every progressive organization, not just anti-war groups, every labor movement, every community organization, every faith-based entity that really cares about social justice, start talking about the Iran war, bring people into the streets, get involved, do something to bring the anti-war message. Again, this also, in addition to the suffering you're mentioning in Lebanon, and the suffering in Iran, of course, but this could very easily lead to a global conflict. I mean, this is major war. This is not a minor war. This is a major war. And if you had asked people in 1913, the year before World War I started, a war that took 20 million lives in 4 years, will there be a world war? Will there be a global conflict? Almost no one would have said, yes, we can see that coming. That wasn't anticipated. But the nature of imperialist politics in 1913 actually drove the war. Why is Trump increasing the military budget from $900 billion today? It was 750 billion 2 years ago. Now it's 900 billion. Why is it going to 1.5 trillion next year? The U.S. Pentagon, these madmen like Stephen Miller, are actually preparing for global war. They actually think this is the answer. This is the arrogance and the hubris that leads to catastrophe. And the American people must act. We're trying to do everything possible to activate a mass anti-war movement.
No, I think that's an extraordinarily important point. And yeah, we can't underestimate the I would say, psychotic reality of some of these people who are willing to risk World War III. And one of the things I wanted to ask you to respond to, Brian, is some of the just so-called justifications here. I mean, I've seen a lot of people who are for the war. They're like, since 1979, Iran has killed thousands of Americans and is responsible for all these things. And, this is our number one enemy, and so on and so forth. And it just feels to me like a just completely false historical presentation that leaves out what the United States, the United Kingdom, and others have done to really set the stage and to continue over the years to target Iran. I mean, obviously among other countries, for independence, really, over and above anything else. And these demonization attempts really just leave out, I would say 70% of the relevant historical context that people in the U.S. need to know to understand the framing of this conflict.
No, very, very important. Demonization is the go-to propaganda technique of the war makers to prepare the population to hate and fear the entity that's going to be targeted by the U.S. Pentagon. So, we saw that war after war after war. In the case of Iran, the United States broke relations with Iran and imposed economic sanctions on Iran in 1979, when the Iranian people, in a genuine people's revolution, multi-class, multi-political tendency revolution, overthrew a monarch, overthrew a dictator, overthrew a king, the Shah, who had been imposed on the Iranian people in a U.S. CIA coup in 1953, when Iran's democratically elected government, it was not an Islamic government, the government of Mohammad Mossadegh, democratically elected government dared to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, also known as BP now, or British Petroleum. They said, look, we're going to take those oil revenues and use those revenues, those profits, to alleviate hunger in Iran. And Iranians were starving. And the U.S. overthrew that government, imposed a king, a dictator, on the Iranian people for 26 years. And they overthrew that king after 26 years. And that's when the U.S. broke relations. It has nothing to do with democracy. The U.S. was unhappy that the Iranians tried to overthrow a dictatorship because it was a U.S. propped up dictatorship. It was a U.S. proxy. So that's the most important backstory for what's going on. Look, the Iranian population is very divided. Some are Islamicists, some are secular, some are leftist, some are conservative. But regardless of where people are politically, the Iranian people demand that the U.S. government stop bombing its people, its country, its land, its schools. It's the elementary schools. 2 more schools, by the way, were bombed today. The Iranian people, regardless of where they're coming from politically, unless they're the monarchist faction, they want this to end. And so the American people have to realize the backstory. It's U.S. imposing its will on the Iranian people, and the Iranian people wanting, like all people, to be free, sovereign, independent, and self-determining about their own future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
I mean,
absolutely.
I think that we can say that for the entire global South. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead, Rania, please.
No, I mean, I thought I was filling in the gap, but also I thought maybe there's a delay. I can't tell if there's a delay with me or not, because I feel like we're doing that thing where like I talk and I'm like, wait, and then it takes you a second to respond. My internet is not the best today. Please forgive me.
Could I make one
No.
final point?
Please.
You all
Yes.
saw, this is maybe a smaller point, but it's not an unimportant point. The Iranian boat that was torpedoed by the U.S. Navy and sunk, and all of the sailors were left to die, the Iranian sailors in the Indian Ocean. That ship had been invited to participate in annual Indian military exercises. The U.S. was also a participant. And at the last minute, the U.S. government canceled its participation in the exercises, left the exercises. The exercises ended, and this Iranian ship that the U.S. sailors had been right next to for weeks in preparation for the exercises left the port. And as it left the port to go home, it was torpedoed. And then all of the sailors were left to die, which is a war crime. I mean, maybe it's a smaller part of the war, but it really stands out to me about the wickedness and the aggression of the U.S. and the fact that the Indian government has done almost nothing to protest. This is a complete violation of the sovereignty of India as well. But again, everybody should know that this is a murderous campaign in all ways, and the American people don't want it, don't support it. The government speaks in our name, but not with our consent, and we're going to build a movement to stop it.
No, I think that's a critically important point, and rising anger in India today about that issue, and also the fact that Modi was there, I think, about 2 days before the war started, and people wondering, what's the connection here between India's, at least tacit support for this and some of these actions that are taking place. And appreciate you as always, Brian. And of course, Brian Becker, you're the host of the Socialist Program, also with the Answer Coalition, who I know is planning things this upcoming Saturday, March 7th, against the war. So as always, really appreciate you joining us on the show.
Thank you.
Rania?
So there's news that broke recently within the last hour that Donald Trump has said he believes in Axios interview said he believes that he should be personally involved in selecting Iran's next leader. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Trump declared himself president or supreme leader of Iran. Unbelievable.
Yeah. New colonial mission. He thinks he's Philip V or something like that. Rania, you were able to interview a little earlier Foad Izadi, who's an associate professor at the University of Tehran, about everything that is going on in all of the regards of what we've been talking about. So I think we want to go to that interview now.
I am very happy to be joined by Associate Professor of World Studies at the University of Tehran, Foad Izadi. Foad, thank you so much for joining us at Breakthrough News.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I am speaking to you from Lebanon. You are in Tehran. We are both sitting in countries that are being bombed by the Israelis. Of course, your country is being bombed by both the Americans and Israelis. I think, are we on day 5 or day 6 at this point? I'm starting to lose track. But I guess before I elaborate into more specific questions, I just wanted to kind of ask you your general thoughts about what's transpired over the last week.
We are getting bombings every few hours, extensive. We have lost more than 1,000 civilians so far, including 165 little girls when their school was hit. We are dealing with the Epstein class. They like to rape little American girls and bomb and kill little Iranian girls. It's very sad. A diplomatic solution was available. I don't know if you saw the interview of the Omani foreign minister. He went to Washington and to stop the war. He said that a diplomatic solution was available within 24 hours, his words. He said that Iran was willing to give concessions that Iran was not able to give in 2015. And he basically begged Trump not to attack Iran, and Trump did it anyway, less than 24 hours after that interview, which is understandable because on the first day they said that they want to change Iran's government. So if you want to change a country's government, you would not enter a diplomatic agreement with that government. They're going to fail, but once they realize they're failing, they're going to kill a lot of innocent people.
Indeed. Well, I wanted to ask you, I think a lot of people are struck by how after many, many assassinations of senior Iranian government officials and military officials, Iran is still standing. The government is still capable of carrying out a war, quite a complicated war on several fronts. So what do you attribute Iran's ability to continue to sustain this war effort despite so many losses, including that of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei?
Iran is a serious country. We have had 7,000 years of civilization. Invaders have come and gone. Iran continues to live. Iran will continue to live many years after the Epstein class has destroyed America. This is very sad, but since people were expecting another aggression, because Iran was attacked in June, they were planning extensively to make sure that the country can survive even if officials are illegally assassinated, and they have been doing a good job. The people who are not with us anymore made sure that the country can continue as you see it is doing.
And we do see reports now suggesting that the U.S. plans to arm or has already started arming minority separatist groups with a specific emphasis on the Kurds. But there are other minority separatist groups in Iran that the U.S. would like to arm and help destabilize the country further internally. So I'm curious, can you explain to our audience what does that look like? What are these various groups that the U.S. is hoping will help cause internal destabilization in Iran? And is the Iranian government prepared for that kind of scenario?
Yes, they're prepared. We had these riots in January. They were designed to change Iran's government. If they were successful in January, you would not see what you see today. The plan at that time was to have Mossad agents in Iran in quite large numbers. This is not an analysis of an Iranian professor. This is what Mike Pompeo said at that time, sending them New Year's greetings to Mossad agents. He has not taken down the tweet that he had, and he is the former head of the CIA, so I would take his words seriously. That failed. They killed a lot of people in Iran. They killed shopkeepers that refused to close their shops. Pahlavi had announced that there should be a general strike, and these people were killing citizens when they were refusing to go along with those plans. We lost more than 200 police officers during those riots. Trump likes to exaggerate the numbers. In his State of Union address, he said that 32,000 people were killed. This is not accurate. I'm surprised some of these Western media outlets believe that. Trump also says that he won the 2020 election against Biden. They have problem with that, but they don't have problem with this one. Iranian government published all the names and the ID numbers of the people who were killed, 3,117. Trump or Netanyahu or any of these news outlets that repeat their propaganda have not been able to add one single name to that list. Out of that 3,117, about 2,400 were ordinary citizens, police officers, people on one side, and the other side lost about 600-700 people, which is unfortunate. All of them are victims of that regime change operation that did not work. Since that didn't work, the new plan now is to bomb Iran extensively, kill ordinary citizens, trying to create mayhem and sort of confusion and fear. And then they have been paying these terrorist organizations outside Iran's borders for many years. CNN covers them every few months. If you go back to old CNN archives, they have been around for a while under American and Israeli payroll to be used at a time that we have right now. So the idea is for them to come in because the old method, the method in January didn't work. They need, beside the Mossad agents, they need trained terrorists so they can come and take maybe a small town or engage in operations like that. And then they would say that we freed this city or we freed this city, and with the hope that this can be repeated in other parts of Iran. The idea is to change Iran's government. What is happening in practice is that Trump has unified Iranians more than any Iranian politician could do. He every night, we are in the month of Ramadan, after iftar, after people open their fasts, they come to the streets in millions every night in the last few nights. And this is what actually Netanyahu asked Iranians to do. So they are coming to the streets, but they're chanting against Netanyahu and Trump. Even people who did not like government policies, they don't want their schools to be bombed, their hospitals to be bombed. Since you are in Lebanon, you are familiar with the WWIII doctrine. This is an Israeli military doctrine that dictates severe civilian casualties to achieve some policy goal. They did this in Lebanon. They did this in Gaza. The Israelis want to make Tehran look like Gaza. People understand that. People, the average IQ in Iran is no less than the average IQ internationally. People know who Trump is, who Netanyahu is. They know that these people are not interested in human rights because they just finished killing at least 70,000 women and children in Gaza. They know Trump is not interested in democracy. He's destroying American democracy. So how would you trust Trump with democracy issues? People understand that. Everybody in Iran understands that, even people who don't like the government. So they don't want to be the foot soldiers for Trump and Netanyahu, and they are not going to be able to overthrow Iran's government. They, in fact, have, in practice, have strengthened Iran's government. Trump is not really familiar with the culture here. 90% of Iranians are Shia Muslims. You don't create a martyr for Shia Muslims. This is going to unite the country. And this is what they have done. They have created a martyr by killing Iran's leader.
And, I know you see that U.S. officials, many of them have stated that they're not ruling out boots on the ground. There was this briefing to members of the Senate a couple days ago, and many of them came out saying they were extremely worried that this administration was going to indeed try to send American soldiers into Iran. We've also seen Israeli politician Benny Gantz make a similar statement. So my question for you is, are the Iranians taking this threat seriously, or do they just see it as rhetoric? And what would that look like if there was some sort of invasion of Iran?
U.S. soldiers on Iranian territory would be easier to hit than people who are hiding in hotels in Dubai. Although Iran doesn't want the continuation of war, the hope that Iran has is that Trump and Netanyahu realize they made a huge mistake. And the hope is that Trump would stop. He could stop the war today. He could stop attacking Iran today. He can declare victory, and then he can go and invade Canada or Greenland or whatever he wants to do next. This is the hope that Iran has. But if they continue, Iran has no other choice but to fight back. And if they bring soldiers on Iranian grounds, I think a lot of Iranian generals would welcome that, because they can get these people much easier.
And then, I wanted to ask if you could explain to our audience the strategy behind attacking the Arab Gulf states specifically. And also, I'm still not entirely certain, but yesterday we saw there was an Iranian missile that was intercepted over Turkey. So is Turkey now a part of that equation? And if so, might that risk bringing NATO into the war? But yeah, if you could maybe explain Iran's strategy, because most people who are watching American, mainstream media are just getting this kind of narrative that, Iran is just insanely like attacking every country around it. But obviously there's some sort of strategy and reason behind this.
With regard to Turkey, just maybe a couple of hours ago, the Iranian military issued a statement that they did not direct any missiles towards Turkey. I think what happened probably, this is what happened, that they were hitting some of these terrorist camps in northern Iraq, and it's because it's very near the Turkish border, it's possible that maybe a missile has gone on the other side of the border. But there is an official statement saying that they have not done that with regard to Turkey. With regard to the Persian Gulf states, the unfortunate thing is that the U.S. bases are based in these countries. So if you want to fight back, these are legitimate military targets. The bases are legitimate military targets. And what the U.S. government has done is that they have moved U.S. soldiers to hotels inside these cities, which is not a good thing to do, because U.S. soldiers, when they're attacking Iran, become legitimate military targets. And when they're moved inside cities, then that building becomes a legitimate military target. They evacuated some hotels, and they have given those hotels to U.S. military full of American soldiers. So they are hit. CIA headquarters in these countries are legitimate military targets. They're in office areas. They're not in U.S. bases. Why CIA is legitimate? Because they provide the data when U.S. military is attacking Iran. They provide the intelligence. They are legitimate military targets. And then you have debris, unintended hits. Iran is hitting U.S. targets in this region. And then some of these countries, when they see an Iranian missile, they try to hit it, and sometimes they are successful. That creates debris. Iran cannot control the debris. It falls, I think it was CNN or Al Jazeera reporting in UAE, and oil facility was hit by debris, and which Iran is not responsible for that. Iran is not responsible for any of these things that are happening, because Iran did not start this war. This is a war of choice by U.S. and Israel, and they shouldn't have started it. So the best thing, if they want to avoid debris that fall in unintended locations, maybe they should stop hitting Iranian missiles. Let them reach the destination that they have. This is a serious business. These countries are, they watched the genocide in Gaza for 2 years, didn't do much. Just don't do much. Just watch. The same way you watch the genocide in Gaza, just watch. We don't expect them to be fighting American and Israelis, but we expect them to understand what's going on. Just continue watching like you did in Gaza.
And I just wanted to ask, in terms of like oil and gas installations, is that I actually don't know. I just know that there's been hits on them. Is that considered a part of, like, as far as you see from the way it's being reported in Iran, are those considered a part of those targets? Or is that also like a debris situation? I know also there was a couple airports, I think like maybe Kuwait and Dubai, that had some damage to them. I teach at University of Tehran. Yeah. So I'm not. I don't have any special sort of data. But what I understand is that Iran wants to keep good relations with its neighbors. Netanyahu managed to fool Trump, and he's using American soldiers to fight his war against Iran. Netanyahu is interested in using Kuwaiti and Saudi and UAE soldiers against Iran. And hopefully they're not as foolish as Trump is. So Iran does not want to have difficult relations with these countries. Iran has, with Oman, Qatar, relations have been good. They have been trying to normalize relations with Saudis. They should understand this, that if US and Israel are
successful with their objectives against Iran, they will be next. If the Israelis can dominate this part of the world, then they will be next, and they may endure some cost. It is true that this is a war zone, a war that U.S. and Israel started. In a war zone, there could be difficulties, but the difficulty of an Israeli domination throughout the Middle East is going to be really bad for these countries as well. They want to disintegrate Iran. They want to balkanize Iran. The problem they have is that the current Iranian government doesn't allow that. So they want to overthrow the government so they can do that. And if they manage to balkanize Iran, this is not good for this region. So the hope is that they understand these things.
Well, I mean, speaking to what you're saying, we've actually heard Israeli officials say that they specifically mentioned Turkey and Saudi Arabia as being the next Irans, is how they frame it. I wanted to ask you,
Israel.
Yeah,
If they get Greater Israel includes a lot of Saudi territory.
That's true.
And many other countries. Yes.
And as Mike Huckabee said, they should just take it. I wanted to ask you about Hezbollah's entrance into this war. Just get your thoughts on the fact that there was, I believe, yesterday, the Iranians and Hezbollah actually coordinated an attack. I think in Tel Aviv, where like one hit. I think the Iranians hit, and then a little bit, like a few minutes later, Hezbollah hit. And I think that might actually be the first real sort of coordinated attack by the two. But that said, I just kind of wanted to get your assessment. Do you see these two fronts as connected? And what do you think is the significance here?
There was supposed to be a ceasefire, and what the Israelis did was they violated the ceasefire every day. They killed 5, 6, 10, 20 people every day while they were supposed to have ceasefire. So Hezbollah is fighting for Lebanon. Iran is fighting for Iran. And I think the Hezbollah leadership is tired of getting hit every day. They decided to respond. Of course, people in this region are upset about the killing of Iran's leader. So that is a good reason to make sure that Israelis don't engage in these activities cost-free. Because if it's cost-free, they would want to do to Lebanon the same thing that they're doing in Iran and other countries, dominate these countries. And being dominated by Israelis is not good. You can ask the Palestinians if you don't believe that.
Yeah. And then lastly, Foad, I wanted to ask you, from your point of view, what is Iran's endgame, right? Because right now, you have really bombastic rhetoric from the U.S. in addition to just carrying out these criminal bombings with the Israelis and saying that they'll go for 8 weeks, maybe forever. They want, one day Trump wants 1 hour Trump wants regime change. The next hour he wants no nukes for Iran. The next hour he wants to get rid of their ballistic missiles program. The goalposts keep changing. And, right now, Iran is saying under these circumstances, they will not negotiate a ceasefire. So I'm just curious, from the Iranian side, what do you think is the end game? And what do you think would change that calculation? Because at this point, it's like the escalation ladder has gone so high, it's really hard to see what anyone's end game is anymore because, the situation has just gotten completely out of control, which is, of course, is first and foremost the U.S.'s fault.
With regard to Iran's nuclear program, the head of the national U.S. intelligence committee, the director of national intelligence, went to the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee, provided the report. It's called the Worldwide Threat Assessment. It's available at dni.gov. Her assessment of Iran's nuclear program in that report says 3 things about Iran's nuclear program. One, this is before the June attacks, a couple of months before the June attacks. 1, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. 2, Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon program. And 3, Iranian leaders have not decided to have a nuclear weapon program. And if the U.S. was really worried about Iran's nuclear program, they would enter an agreement with Iran. Iran was willing to do a lot in terms of reaching a settlement on Iran's nuclear program. They did not, because they're not really worried about that's an excuse to attack Iran. They're not worried about that. Maybe they're worried about ballistic missiles, and Iran cannot not have ballistic missiles, because when Iran is attacked, they need these missiles to hit Tel Aviv and Haifa, as they're doing. So that's not possible. What needs to happen is that the U.S. needs to realize they made a mistake. Trump can stop the war today, declare victory. Iranians will look at the damage they have created to the other side. If the assessment of Iranian leaders is the damage, if they look at the damage and see if it's enough or not, the damage to the other side has to be enough. Otherwise, they would attack Iran next month. So there should be enough cost. Iran exercised restraint last time. Iran hit one U.S. base, only one U.S. base. They announced the timing. They even announced the number of missiles they were going to use. And you see what we got out of exercising restraint. We got the country's leader assassinated. The people who believed in exercising restraint are not with us anymore. The new leadership, military leadership in Iran, realizes that these people need to pay a cost. They will assess that cost. They will make an assessment to see whether enough cost has been created. If they realize that that is the case, then Iran would stop. And then you would have some level of peace, and hopefully that peace would continue to endure. This is the end game. They're not going to be able to change Iran's government. They have, in fact, strengthened Iran's government. They can kill a lot of people, but the sooner they realize that they have made a mistake, the better it's going to be for everybody.
Yeah, especially as we see what's happening, with the shutting down of like natural gas plants and with the oil markets. So the economic cost is there as well. Foad Izadi, Associate Professor of World Studies at the University of Tehran. I really appreciate you joining us, and hopefully we can have you back on soon.
Keep safe. Lebanon
yes,
is as dangerous as Iran is, so keep safe.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
Well, I thought a lot of elements there to that interview, Rania, but I'm glad we were able to get that perspective.
Yeah, it's just really strange, like these days, to be talking to people in Iran from Lebanon, because it's like we're both getting our news of what's going to happen next from the Israeli. Well, I am at least from the Israeli Arabic spokesperson's account, which I have on notification, as everybody in Lebanon does. If they can, because that's where you see like the displacement orders, where they'll say, leave this area now, like get 300 meters away, 500 meters away, blah, blah, blah. It's just a weird dystopian way to live. And I know Iranians are living that way right now too, because I mean, they've essentially enacted a kind of Gaza doctrine in Tehran, seeing the images and reports out of what's happening there. So anyways, really good to be able to talk to people who are in the country.
Well, let's move on to other critically important perspectives on what's going on here. And we are very, very honored to be joined on the show here once again by Jamal Abdi, who is the president of the National Iranian American Council, NIAC. Jamal, thanks so much for jumping on with us again.
Yeah, of course, anytime.
I saw a video yesterday on Instagram from Iran. It was of a young woman, in a sweatsuit. Her hair was uncovered, and she was understandably extremely distraught about the bombing and just speaking to the camera about, just the terrible nature of being under bombs. And just the subtext of the video and just what I could draw from who she appeared to be just felt like it really undermined so much of what we're hearing on mainstream U.S. media, which is that this bombing is the road to freedom for Iranians.
Yeah, there has been a narrative that has been in the works for many years. Trump spent no time trying to sell this war to us, didn't even bother to, they're starting to get the lies out, but didn't really make the case. But this case has been building through other venues for many years. And I think it's important to understand that we're getting these messages, supposedly all 90 million Iranians just love to be bombed and want Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, who just got done with a genocide, to come liberate Iranians. Obviously, this is complete nonsense. This is like a Saddam Hussein election, saying everybody supports this. The fact is, people are a population of 90 million. People have different views, but what people are seeing on the ground right now, even people who were sort of at wit's end and saying, well, there's no other option, let's throw caution to the wind and hope for a war. Even those people are seeing what is happening around them and realizing that this is not going to be some easy one and done surgical strikes, remove the regime completely and install a democracy. Like, those notions are all falling by the wayside after many, many years of efforts to both condition Americans and people around the world about the supposed threat that Iran is posing. What I think some members of Congress have started to refer to as the yearly imminent threat from Iran. For 47 years, Iran has posed an imminent threat, which is kind of an oxymoron. So that has been happening, but also Iranians and the Iranian diaspora have been a particular target of this effort to, not just manufacture consent, but really a psyop conducted by the Israelis, elements of which have been exposed and revealed. We already, there are Haaretz and Citizen Lab have reported on the fact that the Israeli intelligence minister, now technology minister, orchestrated a massive online campaign with bots and troll farms and all of these things to prop up the image of the son of the deposed Shah, Reza Pahlavi, and to promote this notion of regime change coming from the outside. We know that there are channels, two of the largest Persian language networks in the world are ones that are funded by Israel and Saudi Arabia. And they have run a long propaganda campaign to convince Iranians to want those bombs to fall. And even still, I think that you're still looking at a very, sort of a marginal part of the population who maybe believes that. And both here in the United States and inside of Iran, there is a campaign to try to tell people that those are the ones who represent the entirety of the Iranian population, the entirety of the Iranian diaspora. And it's completely false, and any nuance is being shut out of the conversation because it's inconvenient to what is happening.
Jamal, you wrote a really good piece, like I want to say maybe like 10 days, 9 days. It was published 9 days before the war on Iran was launched. It's called Inside the Iran War Industry. And and what you've said already, you've alluded to a little bit of that, but you point out this network of foreign governments, lobbying groups, think tanks, and diaspora opposition figures. And I'm just wondering if you could maybe elaborate a bit and kind of walk us through how those particular actors have worked together to shape the policy that we're seeing play out right now.
Yeah, we all know about the Israel lobby and what that entails here in the United States. And it's not just AIPAC, it's not just Democratic Majority for Israel. It is these think tanks like the Washington Institute for Near East Peace, which was formed as an offshoot of AIPAC. It is groups like Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which is probably the most active, proactive advocate for war on Iran. They have this nice name, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. This was actually formed as a group its original name was, I think, Ehmet, which means truth in Hebrew. And it was a group that was established to promote Israel and Israeli policies to the United States. And then after 9/11, they changed their name to Foundation for Defense of Democracies because, does that sound even more compelling? That's a group that Israeli officials have been caught on camera saying they are working for the Israeli government. Of course, if a group was working for the Iranian government, they would have been shut down and FBI would have investigated and everything. But there are all these organizations running around Washington. And what they worked to do over the really post-Iran deal, so like post 2015, when Trump ripped up the deal in 2018, there has been this effort to really turn the Iranian diaspora into an appendage of the Israel lobby and to really take what AIPAC and FDD and others have been pushing for years and put an Iranian veneer on it so that they could say, this isn't us calling for bombing Iran. This is Iranians inside of Iran and outside of Iran who all want to be bombed. That has, as I mentioned, there are the broadcast networks that have been propped up. There's also, a lobbying network here in the United States, and you'll see, there have been Iranian American groups that have cropped up that have very close ties to groups like FDD and groups like AIPAC, and who happen to be lobbying and backing the exact same initiatives as these organizations. And they get to take the lead because, look, you have a native face who's actually calling for these things. So that's really the situation that we're looking at. And the sad thing is that, like, for a group like mine, our focus has been to encourage Iranian Americans to get involved in the civic process and to, meet with your member of Congress and run for office and, speak loudly about what you believe and the policies you want to see. And we told people, don't keep your head down. That was sort of the Iranians came to the United States, and there's this sort of mentality of, don't get involved in politics. We saw how that played out under the Shah. We see how that has played out under the Islamic Republic. So keep your head down, stay out of trouble, and the state won't come for you. And we always told people, no, you need to keep your head up. You need to, be a part of this process because we live in a democracy and everybody should have a say and you shouldn't fear political violence. And what has happened is, in addition to the propagandizing, there has been a coordinated campaign to threaten and intimidate and cancel and censor anybody who is Iranian who is on the wrong side of things and is saying no to war, yes to diplomacy, no to sanctions. There have been many people who have been, whether it's death threats, other threats to their livelihood, threats to their family, social pressure, online pressure, who have just exited the field. Who otherwise would be out there right now warning against war with Iran. And so we've had this campaign of intimidation combined with this campaign of propaganda to try to shape the sort of the political economy of the Iranian diaspora so that it is speaking in just one voice and it's adhering to one view of things, which is that Iranians need to be liberated by American bombs dropped by Israel and the United States, and Reza Pahlavi needs to be installed as the next leader of Iran.
Jamal, I feel like you're hitting on such an important issue because, this feels like an extraordinary assault on free speech in the United States as well, that people feel they can't speak out. And at least in my feeling, it also has sort of an anti-racist element to it too, in terms of pushing back against this, because the very idea that just because of who you are, what your roots may be, ethnicity, language, immigration status, you also feel you are at a more vulnerable state. It just feels like for the concept of democracy in the United States, this is really a dangerous moment if these voices are allowed to prevail in terms of who, quote unquote, has the right to speak.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and that's what the aim of this all is. For the first time, we were starting to tell people, if you don't have citizenship, if you're on a visa, even if you're on a green card, now with Trump in office, you may need to stop posting on social media. You need to be careful about what you post because they're actually monitoring this stuff. That is a case of, the state doing this, but they're already, for our community, people are already worried about, if I post something online, that affects my ability to go to Iran. The state is potentially going to see that and I get thrown in jail. Now they're afraid of, if I post something, my own government or here in the United States, I'm going to, get detained or put in an ICE facility or deported. And then on top of that, you've got this pressure from, this sort of orchestrated, manufactured campaign to silence people. And it's really, I think people are starting to snap out of it. I've heard from so many people who are upset. And they say, how are they parading Iranian Americans in the streets celebrating, Iranians getting killed? How is the White House posting a video, a mashup of Iranian Americans, dancing to the YMCA, doing the Trump dance and everything? This is offensive and embarrassing to our community and offensive to Iranians who are having these policies inflicted upon them. And so I do hope that sort of the antibodies of our community reveal themselves and people start to feel more empowered to be able to speak out against this. And that doesn't mean that there aren't people who feel that this is positive or people who feel one way or the other, but it's just we're in this authoritarian vacuum right now where if you don't say things the way that the pro-war folks want, you get attacked and threatened and censored and risk having your life ruined because of your political views.
And one thing I wanted to ask you lastly here, Jamal, is in terms of this White House and the sort of political environment that we're witnessing at the moment, especially with the lack of popularity, the lack of backing from the American public for this war. I mean, the number is something like 25% support this, which is very low. But, Trump is powering through. We're hearing, this could go on for 100 days, maybe till September. But there are a lot, it looks like it could stoke some political chaos. There are cracks showing. I see a recent report that Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, panicking over gas prices going up. And she's telling advisors to bring ideas to the Oval Office to lower gas prices. And I mean, we're just 6 days in here, right? And look at the region is on fire in an unprecedented way. You've got potential supply obstacles that can cause some real problems to the global economy. And again, we're just 6 days in. So I guess I'm just curious, how do you see this playing out politically in the U.S.? I don't think this is going to actually go the way Trump wants. I mean, he can go around destroying and smashing. He has the full weight of the U.S. military. But I just can't imagine this is sustainable on a domestic level.
Yeah, I agree. And yet, at least in the moment we're in, we saw last night the Senate voted on the Iran War Powers Resolution to force the president to stop the war. And as usual, it was sort of party lines. We had Rand Paul come out for the Republicans as the lone Republican supporting ending the war. We had John Fetterman as the lone Democrat wanting to keep the war going. And so we haven't seen those shifts happen yet. But in private, members of Congress are, I think, freaking out a little bit about what is happening. They see what's happening. It hasn't broken yet, but I think the closer we get to the midterms, especially, there's going to be a need for people to free themselves from the albatross of this war and maybe, separate themselves from Donald Trump. So I do think that is really, I mean, as far as tools we have to stop this war, that is one of the important tools we have to put pressure on political pressure on lawmakers to break from Trump on this. And I also think the fact of how bad this is. I mean, this thing, it took the Iraq war many months to become a quagmire. It took many months before an insurgency sort of rose up and things started to look very bad. We're 5 days in, and I think what happened was that this was a war of choice, and it was Donald Trump's choice, but this has been Netanyahu's, passion and hobby horse for decades. And I think what we're looking at is that Netanyahu essentially convinced Trump to go forward, was very concerned that the negotiations with Iran might actually lead somewhere, and convinced Trump that, hey, we've actually got a target on Khamenei. We have a chance to take him out. You've got the armada out there. It's either go now or we don't go at all. And Trump decided, okay, yeah, let's see what happens. It's going to last 4 or 5 days. We'll, declare victory and move on. And instead, every bad thing that people warned about is now happening, including there are reports of ethnic separatists being armed by the CIA, potentially special forces coming into Iran. The United States, unlike Iraq, the United States, more like Syria, the United States is creating the insurgency to destabilize the country and collapse it and foment a civil war. So all these bad things are happening. And Susie Wiles, Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, this war has been propagandized for decades. And yet we're seeing it prosecuted in the dumbest, most unthought out way possible, which is it's sad for the lives that are going to be lost and the consequences that are being had. But politically, there is an opportunity to actually stop this thing because it is so unpopular, and it just falls on advocates and just ordinary people to keep the pressure up and to demand that their elected representatives call for this war to be stopped.
Mm-hmm. And real quick, Jamal, for people who want to know more about NIAC and all the efforts you all are making, where should they go?
Go to our website. It's niacouncil.org, or on Twitter or all the social medias, NIA Council, National Iranian American Council.
Jamal Abdi, president of the National Iranian American Council. Thanks again for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Well, Rania, I was just going to prompt you, since we prompted at the start of the show. Everyone who stayed with us, thanks for staying with us. It's been a great show. But of course, you are there in Lebanon, and I'm sure people are seeing the images, terrible Israeli destruction in Lebanon, and seemingly continue moving forward. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to, give folks a lay of the land.
Well, Eugene, today is day 4 of the massive escalation against Lebanon. It's day 6 of the U.S. Israeli launch of the war on Iran. But because Iran is basically the big story and what's happening in the region, Lebanon's gotten a lot less attention. But today, I think things have deteriorated quite rapidly here. But today deteriorated even more. Everyone edge after this afternoon. The Israelis, the Israeli Arabic language spokespeople issued a directive demanding people leave the southern suburbs of Beirut, known as Dahi, home to hundreds of thousands of people. Basically, they call it an evacuation order, but these are displacement orders. They said hundreds of people must leave to save their own lives. They want to empty the entire southern suburbs of Beirut out. And of course, this caused massive chaos, massive traffic. This also comes after demanding the evacuation of Lebanon's entire south of the Litani River days earlier. This new displacement order of, again, hundreds of thousands of people who live in the suburbs of Beirut, majority Shia. Israel sees it as, Hezbollah's base of support. You constantly hear this area of Beirut referred to as a Hezbollah stronghold. This is where Israel typically centers its bombing campaign in the capital around. This is unprecedented, even for the Israelis. Israel's trying to empty out huge portions of the country like never before. Most of the global media is understandably consumed with the war on Iran, so this isn't really getting the attention it deserves, but it's, again, unprecedented. It's also notable that the Israelis are telling the Lebanese in their tweets about demanding that they evacuate. They were telling these Lebanese people that they're displacing from these Shia neighborhoods to take roads to areas of the country, which would inevitably land them in Christian or Sunni areas, which also leads into Israel trying to create sectarian civil chaos in this country, which is another aspect of this that I'll get to. But all that's to say, Israel issuing a master directive for hundreds of thousands of people to evacuate an entire part of the city that's so densely populated suggests that they are going to massively carpet bomb the entire area. So people were basically fleeing for their lives all afternoon and evening with really nowhere to go. You had people in other parts of Beirut really scared about what this would mean for the city in general, opening their windows in case there's massive blasts so that their windows don't break. Just a really scared, panicked situation in the city. It seems as though Israel is applying its Gaza doctrine to Tehran, to South Lebanon, now to the southern suburbs of Beirut. They're totally unleashed with no red lines, this genocidal fascist state with the full backing of the U.S. military in the region right now. It really is, Eugene, a terrifying and shameful moment for humanity. I mean, as the last 2.5 years, Ben, and you also had Israeli Minister Bezalel Smotrich making a statement, I believe from the north, from Israel's north, saying that Beirut's Dahieh district will soon look like Khan Yunis in Gaza. So basically promising to turn it into Gaza. So that's just the most recent development in Lebanon, and everybody's on edge, eyes glued to the live feeds on Lebanese news channels of various parts of the country, but waiting to see what Israel's going to do in Dahieh, waiting to see what they're going to do road that it's next to the airport itself. The country is so on edge, and that's on top of the last several days of massive Israeli bombing. The Lebanese health ministry said just today that the death toll from these renewed Israeli attacks has risen to 77, and then 525 wounded. Before this recent displacement order in Dahieh, there was already 84,000 people displaced across the country. Because again, like I said, the Israelis had issued these displacement orders for over 100 villages in the south. Over 100 villages in the south saying, leave your village. And I'll get to what the actual goal is for that. But I just want to say, just to give people background, been kind of distracted by the other big news out of the region. This all started on Monday morning. And, you know, it didn't really start on Monday morning, but this recent escalation started Monday morning when Hezbollah fired a handful of rockets into the northern Israeli area. And they said in their statement that they released soon after that it was to avenge the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. And it was in response to the endless ceasefire violations, over 15,000 since November 2024. Israel has violated the ceasefire daily. They had killed by that point, since that ceasefire, over 350 Lebanese and injured many. Hezbollah had not one in those 15 months. And so they framed this as a response to that. And it was a handful of rockets, none of which actually caused any damage. Most of them were intercepted. And then, you know, Israel right after that unleashed hell. I actually I woke up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. to the sound of Israel bombing Dahieh on that early Monday morning. Most of the rest of the city heard those bombings as well. They were incredibly intense. And then it just got worse and worse after that. It was like a repeat of, you know, September 2024, but somehow even worse because everybody's already been displaced not too long ago. Some people had just finished rebuilding their houses to only have them bombed again. There are displaced people all over the city, all over different parts of the country. My neighborhood, it looks like it looked in November 2024 when it was just, you know, full of displaced people with nowhere to go, with a drone overhead. But this time around, there's, you know, far less appetite for war. And, you know, on top of that, you know, I just want to go back to the issue of Israel wanting to stoke civil chaos. Again, there are tens of thousands of people displaced. That number is going to rise from the 84,000 number that I already mentioned because of these recent displacement orders. And, you know, the reason, if anybody noticed earlier in the broadcast, I kept looking down. It's because I'm watching my phone to see updates from the Israeli spokespeople. It's so dystopian, Eugene. We literally have them have these people on notification so we can see where they're going to bomb next when they give their displacement orders. That is how we are living in Lebanon right now. And they do it mostly overnight, so it's very difficult to sleep. But all that's to say, these tens of thousands of people that are displaced, and there will be more as Israel widens its scope and issues more evacuation orders, including more recently in the Bekaa. And Israel's also bombed safe places. Like a couple days ago, they bombed Hazmi, which is in the suburbs of Beirut. It's a Christian area that's considered safe. A hotel there, never explained why or what looking for, and they injured severely the receptionist there, just kind of making everybody feel like nowhere is safe. This is intended to make everybody feel unsafe and to fuel unrest because, like I said, the Lebanese are very tired. They have no appetite for another war. And I also have to say that has led to a great deal of anger at Hezbollah for entering into this war. Hezbollah was already domestically weakened, and many had blamed them for the losses that were experienced in 2024 and the big escalation then. And so many in Lebanon see this latest Israeli escalation. They're blaming Hezbollah for it. And especially from the more sectarian right-wing voices in this country, they are really going to town to incite hatred, not just against Hezbollah, but against the constituency they represent, against all the Shia of Lebanon, against the very people that through no fault of their own, through Israel's fault, are being displaced right now. So again, I go back to little appetite, not just for war, but in a polarized sectarian country like Lebanon, where there's so much incitement to hatred, there's also now little appetite to even help the displaced. So people literally have fewer places to go than they had back in September, October, November 2024. It's a very horrible and unfair situation, but that is the material reality of Lebanon right now. And the Israelis are trying to take advantage of that. They know that bombing quote unquote safe areas will be blamed on Hezbollah and on Shia specifically. and therefore risk sectarian infighting. And again, I go back to in the displacement orders they issued for Dahi earlier, they literally gave instructions for where to go. And they basically told people to go to like a road that would take them either to Christian areas or a road that would take them to Sunni areas. They want to see civil chaos in this country. And, I also want to go back to the displacement orders in the South because Israel has also invaded the South. But I would also say that it's not entirely correct to call what Israel's doing simply an invasion, because an invasion would suggest an eventual departure. The Israelis plan on a permanent occupation of the villages they enter in South Lebanon. That's what the Israeli military spokespeople mean when they say things like, and I'm quoting one of them, framing it as a tactical step to create an additional layer of security for the residents of northern Israel. They plan to stay and hold the territory they take. So the displacement notices they're issuing are meant to empty South Lebanon of Lebanese for what they hope will be forever. This is all about stealing land for greater Israel. And sadly, so far, the Lebanese government response has been much like it's been for the past 15 months, but now on steroids. Now, for the last 15 months, the Lebanese government has done almost nothing. They have done nothing to try to protect the people who've been subjected to constant Israeli bombings and raids in the South. In fact, instead, they've had the U.S. gun to their head, and they have basically tasked the Lebanese army with disarming Hezbollah south of the Litani River. So basically taking away the ability of the people of the South to defend themselves against Israeli aggression. And after one day, the Lebanese government ordered Hezbollah to disarm and labeled Hezbollah's military actions as illegal and any further actions as illegal, and its military wing as illegal. They basically banned it. And to show how isolated domestically Hezbollah has become, even their ally on Monday, Navid of the ML movement, essentially backed the government's measures, demonstrating, I think, a new level of isolation for this group in this country domestically. And a part of that had to do with the fact that, he was the one who was acting as an interlocutor between, Hezbollah and the government in many ways, like promising, they're giving assurances basically to the government that Hezbollah had promised they wouldn't get involved in this war, in this U.S. war with Iran. And since then, the Lebanese government has also basically ordered the army to retreat from the south. I mean, and again, this has happened. It's a very difficult balance because the army does not have the capability to even fight the Israelis. They don't have the weapons for it. And on top of that, the donor countries to the army are all countries that wouldn't allow that anyway. So it's, to be in the Lebanese army is a tough position to be in. But basically, they've also got the army policing people from going back to the south if they try, especially if they have weapons. And so they've actually arrested a number of people who were going towards the south with weapons, Lebanese people, I mean. And even more recently today, the Lebanese government banned the IRGC in Lebanon and said so that's like a new, basically trying to please the Americans and Israelis as like a desperate measure to get them to stop what they're doing, because this is a nightmare for everyone in Lebanon. And again, this is not a justification for the behavior of the Lebanese government at all, but they do have guns to their heads. The Hezbollah has given reasons for why they did this, entered this war. They insist that they had no choice to use what they saw as a strategic opportunity to hit back at the Israelis for 15 months of ceasefire violations that they sat on their hands for and didn't answer until now. And then, also in their statement, they did say it was to avenge the death of Ali Khamenei, which was kind of bad for the optics in this country because, by the people who hate them, Hezbollah is framed as being an extension of Iran. So the fact that they said that in the statement just kind of gave more fuel to that fire. But regardless, very few people, Eugene, expected them to enter this war, given that they've been militarily and domestically weakened in this country since the big war that we had in 2024. And there do remain some serious questions as to why they decided to intervene now and to what end. And that includes even, those questions are coming out even among some of their supporters. And, Hezbollah has also said that they entered this war not just because of the ceasefire violations, but also they say that Israel was planning a preemptive attack on Lebanon. So they were preempting Israel's preemption. That's also caused a lot of debate. And, I want to say the Lebanese absolutely have a right to armed resistance against Israel. Any people do against a settler colonial entity. The Lebanese government, like I said, with a U.S. gun to their head, has done nothing to protect its people. Since November 2024, only Hezbollah has abided by that ceasefire. Israel's bombed Lebanon near every single day for the last 15 months. And, you know, I just keep reiterating that because it's very, very important to remember. But that said, you know, Israel right now is many could argue at its strongest with the full force of the U.S. military stationed in this region. And the Israelis did spend all of last week before the Iran war was launched, threatening to destroy Lebanon, including its civilian infrastructure, if Hezbollah were to get involved in this war. So many are saying, you know, you knew what the cost of would be, and now that's what we see happening. And it's just a complete disaster. It's very scary. We're only in day 4. And because of the impunity given to Israel since the Gaza genocide, I mean, you could argue since before that, but since the Gaza genocide especially, there's very few forces in the world who will even raise their voice against what's happening here. And again, I go back to the fact that it's really getting drowned out by the news on Iran. So here we are once again, displacement orders, the leveling of buildings, and having to navigate this insane situation where you don't know where is safe because even the safe places get bombed. And this is significantly more dangerous than what we saw in 2024 because of the intensity of polarization in this country and all of what I explained about the way that people have blamed Hezbollah, blamed the Shia community. And if Israel's displacing half the country, where are they going to go? They're going to go to areas full of people who have very negative views of them. And that is just a recipe for conflict. And during the Lebanese civil war, like a traffic dispute between two people on different political and sectarian sides could result in, you know, a big battle where lots of people end up dead. And that's where everyone's minds go in this kind of situation.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the comprehensive nature of what you've been able to bring to the forefront, and we are very happy to be able to have those perspectives, which I think are very unique anywhere on your dial, to use an old TV term. And I don't really have that much to add. I thought that was very comprehensive. All I'll say is, do not sound like a broken drum. You got to believe people when they tell you something in the first place. And Marco Rubio already said it. New colonial crusade, genocide, land grabs, occupations, mass murder, divisions of people, the establishment of puppet governments, and the Greater Israel Project is super crucial to this new colonial crusade. And they're telling us how they're moving. And I think that it's incumbent upon people who it's being done in our name, that we raise our voices against that, because I agree with you. It's unbelievably terrible, tragic, unprovoked, you know, criminal, really, what's happening in Lebanon, what's happening all across West Asia. And yes, I thought very well stated on your part. And I just want to again plug Dispatches, which is doing many different episodes on many different things and is getting many different backgrounds on all of these different points. If you go to our website, breakthroughnews.org, or check us out on social media, we have a newsletter that we're putting together with daily events that are going on in the region where you can follow it. I don't know, there's a big siren behind me right now, so I don't know if you can still hear me, but nonetheless, please just keep following us, and we're going to do the best we can to cover all angles of this as much and as in-depth as we can. So any other final points you feel we should leave folks with, Rania?
Yeah, I want to remind people that we are an independent media outlet. We're able to bring you people from on the ground in Iran, experts in the U.S., I'm here in Lebanon to tell you what's happening here. And we have so much that we're able to offer to break through that corporate media warmongering propaganda. So please do consider supporting our work by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news and becoming a member. Independent media is more crucial than ever. And, you know, in moments like this, when I'm sitting here in Lebanon, and as an independent journalist myself, it's when, you know, I always know how important independent media is. But when I see the narratives about my own native country and the way that I'm able to correct it because of the position I'm in, because of the position that you all allow me to be in with your support, it just reminds me on a personal level how important it is to have voices like mine and others who can break through that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And big shout out to you, Rania, for also holding it down once the war started. I was traveling and you were able to hold down a number of fantastic live streams that are all still relevant. Just want to give you a big shout out for that as well. And I know all of our audience appreciated it. Big shout out to our whole Breakthrough News team for always snapping into place at the right moment. Thanks so much to all of our patrons. Thanks so much to all of our guests. And thanks so much, first and foremost, to you all, our viewers who are with us week to week. For our whole team, we will see you next time.